Good afternoon, Pero Wesley Bible studiers. Uh, Glad to see that Honey has made it in spite of load shedding. Hello, Angela. Hello, Stella. And I'm sure George is there somewhere or going to come in soon. Great to have you with us. So today we are looking at Zechariah chapter 11, starting at verse 4, because we did the first 3 verses last time. And it's an interesting passage because we can all understand images of shepherds and sheep and so on. And I think that we like it for that. But it's also a difficult passage because it's not really placed anywhere in history. Sometimes, if it says this is the 3rd month of this king or whatever, then we know exactly what's happening or we know when they're talking about. But this one is difficult to place exactly in history. But on the other hand, the easy part is that we understand the idea of good shepherds and bad shepherds. And so that imagery is very straightforward for us to understand. And I think that I should just say that I think the bottom line of this little passage in Zechariah chapter 11 is to balance out all the very optimistic prophecies that have been coming to say that everything is going to be good. God is in control. He loves Israel. He loves Judah. Things are going to be okay. And it doesn't want the people to think that now paradise has come and it's going to be like heaven, because the reality is that bad things do happen. And so there are good shepherds and bad shepherds throughout history. And, it goes without saying that there have been tough times since then, and there will be tough times still, that everything isn't all sealed and finished yet. And so it was necessary, I believe, just to have a counter there to say, hang on, things are still going to be rough. The battle isn't over. As we go through, I don't have slides for us today. I'm going to go through more or less verse by verse because it's not terribly long. To look at the sense that prophecy goes to more than one era, that we can have prophecy to many, the same prophecy can refer to many places. And so, all right, it seems odd to say that prophecy to the past, but to say that sometimes as we read this, we can see that it applies to Zechariah's past. Sometimes as we read it, we can see that the same thing applies to Zechariah's present. We can see the same thing is a messianic prophecy. In other words, that's to Jesus. And that the same thing is an eschatological prophecy, which means it's to the end times. And this kind of very fluid, unplaced in history prophecy lends itself to that. So we're going to go through looking for the past, Zechariah's present, messianic, and eschatological. And good to see George coming online there as well. Wonderful. So if we have a look at the text, 11 verse 4, this is what the Lord my God says, pasture the flock marked for slaughter. Okay, so we understand that there is God saying, things are not going well. This flock, these sheep, these people of mine need a shepherd. But we are not exactly sure what the context is as to why they need to be slaughtered, why they're going to be slaughtered. And we're also not exactly sure whether Zechariah was intended to go and actually find a group of sheep to be a shepherd for, or whether Zechariah was to go and be a shepherd of the people and to act as their leader and their priest. It is difficult to know, because clearly if he was doing the shepherding either of sheep or of people, then this prophecy, these few verses, would have taken over some length of time. I don't think there's any way of telling. Verse 5, their buyers slaughter them and go unpunished. Those who sell them say, praise the Lord, I am rich. Their own shepherds do not spare them. All right, the most obvious link there is to the slavery that we spoke about last week, that even the rulers were selling their own people into slavery into the northern kingdoms, Tyre, Sidon, Greece, that area. And of course, as you sell people and you get money for it, you become rich. But it could also just be a more generalized way of saying the rulers are abusing the people and things are going wrong. And here it's very easy to see past. Well, yes, that's what happened before the people went into exile. There was a total fall down. The kings were not good. They abused the people and so on. And then we can see in Zechariah's present, the same thing is going to happen, that the leaders will not be good and the people will be abused. We can see that when Jesus came, as a spiritual sense, that the people are not in a good place, but that Jesus comes as the good shepherd. And then ultimately, of course, that right now the war is still going on between Satan and humanity, and that God will ultimately come as the good shepherd and come again. So we can see that this is just a description of the human condition, really, so to speak. So verse 6, I will no longer have pity on the people of the land, declares the Lord. I will hand everyone over to his neighbor and his king. They will oppress the land, and I will not rescue them from their hands. So this is a difficult one because we don't want to hear God saying, I will not have pity, because we believe that this is our forgiving, loving God. And yet it is something that we saw throughout history, that God will give people a chance and then will say, you've had your chance, and now I need to punish you. You need to learn. You need to do it right. This is interesting to go back to Ezekiel 34, and I'm sure that you would have seen yourselves in the cross references how this does refer back to Ezekiel and Jeremiah extensively. Ezekiel 34 is also a long chapter about shepherds and the judgment on the shepherds. And so I'm just going to point out some things. I'm trying to find Ezekiel 34 in my Bible right now. If we look in Ezekiel 34, it's just interesting to see that the first verses up to verse 8 is about what the shepherds do wrong and have done wrong and the judgment on the shepherds. Then it speaks a little bit about what God will do. And then verse 17, it speaks about the judgment on the flock. Now, I found this quite interesting because we're used to the abuse of shepherd, but where he speaks about the flock abusing each other. As for you, my flock, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I will judge between one sheep and another, and between rams and goats. Is it not enough for you to feed on the good pasture? Must you also trample the rest of your pasture with your feet? Is it not enough for you to drink clear water? Must you also muddy the rest with your feet? Must my flock feed on what you have trampled and drink what you have muddied with your feet? Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says to them. See, I myself would judge between the fat sheep and the lean sheep. Because you shove with flank and shoulder, butting all the weak sheep with your horns, until you've driven them away. I will save my flock, and they will no longer be plundered. I will judge between one sheep and another. And you see that relates there to where he says in verse 6, I will hand everyone over to his neighbor and his king. Understanding that not only rulers are abusive, but that humanity tends to be abusive of one another, which is sad, but is the reality. I think we can see that in the past. We can see how it was messianic, but I think we can really see how that fits now, how we can say that it really describes the way that we're living now. We see governments no longer genuinely have their people's interests at heart. They work for salaries, for money, for fame, for fortune, whatever it is. And people in general are living to see what they can get out of life. And okay, while there are zillions and zillions of really good people that care for others, there are also those that use others simply as a way of getting rich. And so, as I say, this is not only messianic, not only in the past, but also eschatological into our times and into the future times. So let's go on to verse 7. So I pastured the flock marked for slaughter, particularly the oppressed of the flock. Again, we're not sure whether he actually did this or whether this happened in a vision, perhaps, that he saw it or how it worked. It says particularly the oppressed is apparently not a very good translation, but it might have been better to say that he pastored the flock on behalf of the sheep merchants. And so it would seem that the sellers of the sheep were the ones that wanted a shepherd. I don't know. It's vague. I could just speak about what the commentators say about the translation. And so that's what they call a sign act. A sign act that the prophet actually does something as part of his prophecy. Then the second sign act comes in verse 7. I took two staffs and called one favor and the other union, and I pastured the flock. Now, this we would have seen goes back to Ezekiel 37, where Ezekiel was told to take two staffs. One was Israel and one was Judah, and he was told them to hold them together in one hand. And this would be a sign that God would reunite Israel, the northern kingdom, and Judah, the southern kingdom. And as we heard in Zechariah 10 last week, that God prophesied again that this is what would happen. But here he's saying, well, yeah, it will happen. But as we go on, we'll see that that staff is also broken. My commentator said the two staffs, the rod and the staff, they comfort me. The two staffs that the shepherd has. Verse 8, in 1 month I got rid of the three shepherds. There is one place that the commentators complain. We've got no idea when in history this is. We don't know who those three shepherds could be. We don't even know if there were specifically three shepherds or if it just meant that you got rid of all of the bad shepherds. We don't know what 1 month means. But we can understand that the general truth is that the good shepherd will be able to overcome the bad shepherds and to win over, basically. Ultimately, from us, from an eschatological point of view, Jesus will triumph and he will come again and rescue all of his people. And so we've spoken about the Seleucids, and we could say that these three shepherds were from the Seleucid time. We could say it was from before. We could say that the three shepherds were the Assyrian king, the Babylonian king, and the Persian king. And we can look all the way to Revelation chapter 13, and we could say that these three shepherds are the beast, the image of the beast, and the prophet of the beast. It is difficult to know what Zechariah had in mind, but we can be pretty sure that it's a general truth that we can put it into all of the different contexts and see that. So the three shepherds, the flock detested me, and I grew weary of them, and said, I will not be your shepherd. Let the dying die and the perishing perish. Let those who are left eat one another's flesh. Okay, pretty disastrous and awful stuff there. Yeah, but we know that throughout history, people have rebelled against God. They have detested him. They have said, we do not want to do this anymore. We want to choose to live our own way. And I'm not going to track it all the way through past Zechariah's present and messianic, although we know that it was like that. But to say that right now, when we look in our present situation, we know that people are impatient with God. They're impatient with religion. And so if the world is God's flock, there is a sense that they have given up on him. And the threat is that he will ultimately give up on the people that choose not to follow him as well. It's a truth that we need to be aware of, that it's not something that we can hide from. And so we have seen it through all the way from the past before Zechariah up until now. The bit about eating one another's flesh did apparently actually happen in AD 70, thereabouts, with the fall of Jerusalem to the Romans. And so that prophecy was actually fulfilled at that time. I believe that it happened also in the pre-exile time as well. And hopefully that's not going to happen again, but I guess. Verse 10, then I took my staff called favor and broke it, revoking the covenant I made with all the nations. That's interesting there where it talks about all the nations. The previous covenant, the covenants that we are aware of, are covenants with the Jews. And so there's an implication here of the eschatological significance, because the covenant since Jesus has been with all the nations. As with God saying, there comes a time when the nations have broken that covenant so thoroughly that I cannot continue. It was revoked on that day, and so the afflicted of the flock who were watching me knew it was the word of the Lord. Okay, there again is a tricky one. What exactly did that mean? Who was watching Zechariah? How did they know? I'm not going to try and put any interpretation in there. Verse 12, of course, the interesting one. I told them, if you think it best, give me my pay, but if not, keep it, because if I haven't fulfilled my job, if I've broken my contract, then don't pay me. So they paid me 30 pieces of silver, which we know is the price of a slave, is considered a very small amount, and of course was the amount paid to Judas in order to betray Jesus. And so that one takes us all the way to Matthew 27, where we see the story of Judas taking the money and then throwing it into the temple. Let's just carry on there. And the Lord said to me, throw it to the potter, the handsome price at which they priced me. So I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw them into the house of the Lord to the potter. This idea of a potter, as to why exactly there would be a potter in the house of the Lord, is tricky. The possibility that the potter was there because he made vessels for the temple. We're assuming now that the temple has actually been finished, and so Zechariah is speaking this after the completion of the temple. It could also be that the word for potter is similar to the word for treasury, and so it actually meant throw it into the temple treasury, which seems much more likely. And people also suggest it could be throw it to the smelter, so that he would melt down the coins and use it for the temple. A little bit uncertain, but the point is that it was thrown into the temple in some manner or other, which, as we see, Judas also did. So Matthew 27 refers back to this passage, but actually says that it's from Jeremiah. So it's a little complicated to figure out. Jeremiah has prophecies about the potter, going to visit the potter, seeing how the potter reworks the clay. Jeremiah also has a prophecy of how he is to buy land, even though the Babylonians are going to come and steal it all away, but that he should buy land because the land would be returned. And so the implication is that as Matthew or Jesus speaks there, okay, it wouldn't be Jesus, was Matthew speaking there, that this is a combined prophecy from Jeremiah and Zechariah somehow together. And it seems to be a common thing that if you quote from a major prophet and a minor prophet, which Zechariah is, that you can just allocate them both to the major prophet. There could be a little bit of thought going on into trying to actually understand Matthew 27 there and the relationship back to Zechariah and to Jeremiah. But the 13 pieces of silver is interesting there, and it does seem to very definitely relate. Then I broke my second staff called Union, breaking the brotherhood between Judah and Israel. So the standard way that it goes, when God's favor goes, unity goes. And the commentators say that in the time after the destruction of the temple, God's favor seems to have left the Jews, and so the unity also did, and that there were factions amongst the Jewish nation, and there was a lot of hostility between the Jews, which did not help their cause in general at all. And that, of course, is the breaking of the promise that we saw in Jeremiah of the unity. Then Zechariah, we know that he'd thrown it away and says, I'm not going to be shepherd to these people anymore. And the Lord said to me, take again the equipment of a foolish shepherd, okay, a worthless shepherd, a shepherd that's no good, because I am now going to raise up a bad shepherd, somebody that's not going to look after the sheep. And again, we're not sure where this prophecy exactly goes. It could have been from way back to the king of Assyria who came to take over Israel, the king of Babylon who came to take over Judah. It could be to Zechariah's present and refer to Antiochus Epiphanes, the Seleucid king who came and really climbed into the Jews. They got through Alexander the Great successfully, but Antiochus Epiphanes was not a good guy. It could refer to something in Jesus' time, or it could refer to the raising of the Antichrist, the beast, as I said earlier, that we read about in Revelation and elsewhere in the Bible. Again, theologically difficult, that God is going to raise this person up, this being up, and the thought that God raises up evil, but also the thought that God is in control and nothing happens without his okaying it. Right, we've got to the end of the chapter really there, because it ends with woe to the worthless shepherd, and to say that it's not going to end badly. It's going to end with good triumphing and all being well. But so bottom line is throughout history we have this thing of God trying to save his people, trying to do the right thing, people being not interested, rejecting. And so God leaves the people, allows them to find their punishment and the consequences of being disobedient, and then starts the process over again. And ultimately, which we believe will happen for the last time when Jesus comes again at the end of the world, the end of time. So thank you for listening. And we're going to go to Zoom now, and I will try to remember to click on the Zoom live button so that people can follow the discussion if they would like to. May God bless you, and we'll see you just now.